hello, same stuff lately. So, a lot of it's you're going to hear is the same stuff from the other book, because it really gets down to what we're talking about when we get to, where is it at? When we get to when we end the occupation, divest from following military, police, and institutions. I think that's the crux of it. Let me go to the... I think Vaughn says we're on 16. Vaughn, were you here yesterday when we were reading it? Cause damn, dude. So yeah, part 1, principles of unity, missions, a 10-point program, background, principles, and area struggles. The third part is part 3 is healing the planet. That's the different right there. That's the different part of the section, you know? Yes? Okay, cool. Where did we end again? Do you think we ended on those pages that you said? To be honest, I think we left off on 15 through 17. All right, we can start with 15. Fuck it. We can start off with 15. Because this book is not that long. Once 15 says, principles, we'll do this. We'll start off with principles. 1, that creates crisis and cannot solve. So we'll do that. Why not? Why not do that? Why not do that? All right, welcome in everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Red Nation itself is a Marxist-Leninist organization. Right down there is you can get information called the Red Nation all at once, the rednation.org. So if you want to investigate further the Red Nation and see how you can maybe even be part of the coalitions that they're doing, and see what you can do to be a part of it, you know what I mean? I think being part of the Red Nation could actually lead more people into more like praxis and organizations, you know what I mean? Because the Red Nation seems pretty well at not only domestic coalitions and organizations, but also global, with other global nations of indigenous nations, such as from like South America and stuff like that. So like they're in huge coalitions globally with a lot of indigenous communities globally. So check out their website, check out their podcasts, see if you can like figure out ways to maybe organize or be adjacent into the struggle, you know? So let's get started. Principles 1. This is going to be repeat, but I don't think there's any problem with repeating. What creates crisis cannot solve it. We've all heard the term divestment during the NODALP uprising in 2016. Oh, I should turn off the music. I forgot about that part. There we go. Where was I at? Water protectors call upon the masses to divest from financial institutions invested in the pipeline as a strategy to reduce harm to people and the planet, and specifically indigenous people. The Red Deal continues to call for divestment from fossil fuel industries, but we go one step further. We draw from black abolitionist traditions to call for divestment away from the caging, criminalizing, and harmful of human beings, and from the exploitative and extractive violence of fossil fuels. But divestment is only half of the equation. What will we do with the resources that will become available once we divest from prisons, military, and detention industry and fossil fuels? As of 2015, military spending accounted for upwards of 54% of all discretionary spending at the federal level. Purposed discretionary spending for national security in 2020 comes in at $750 billion, $718.3 billion of which is slotted specifically for the U.S. military. The spending of the militarization of things is so that they can continue their exploitation even globally through imperialist natures. That's the whole reasons why we have a military economy, why the military receives the most. And now we can see that ICE is now receiving the same type of militarization too. with the cops too. So like different militarized forms that we have in the United States. In a given year, the U.S. Provided $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel. $182 billion is spent each year on cops and prisons, and eight white dudes, all except one, an American citizen, own over half the world's wealth. This doesn't even include the revenues from fossil fuel industries. Compare these figures to the 68. Hold on a second. Compare this figure to the $68 billion allocated for education in 2016 and the $186 billion allocated for mental health services in 2014, and only $66 billion of discretionary funds are spent on healthcare each year, with $5.4 billion allocated to indigenous health service. Despite this allocations of resources, healthcare is still unaffordable for most, half of Americans. Despite treaty and federal obligations, Native people, especially those living in urban locations, experience the worst healthcare of any demographic and industry, like pharmaceuticals, controlled public services throughout lobbying, and getting millions of people hooked on opioids. Yet these already low allocations for health and human services aren't low enough for the ruling class and their elite friends in government office. The U.S. government is threatening to cut spending on education, healthcare, food stamps, and other crucial health and human services in order to further inflate military spending. Imagine if U.S. military had to hold a bake sale to keep its doors open instead of preschool, domestic violence shelters, arts and language programs, and family plan clinics. This is what the Red Deal proposes. Instead of scraping pennies together to salvage a barely livable life, imagine if we had over $1 trillion to invest in healthcare for everyone, to increase teachers' pay so they can provide quality free education to everyone, to repair roads and provide safe and accessible transportation for everyone, to invest in large-scale language revitalization programs in every indigenous nation on the continent. Hey nine. There is a overabundance of resources that go into demonizing indigenous water protectors and land defenders, Muslims, black people, Mexican women, LGBTQ+, and poor people, while the health of the earth and human beings receive barely a sliver of attention of resources. With the resources we gain from divestment, we could end world hunger, literacy, child hunger, houselessness, and build renewable energy tomorrow, literally. 2. Here we go. Yeah, 2. Hold on, let's look. Looking back just real quick. Hey, Void! Hi, Teehee. Comrade Teehee. Thank you, Nai. Boop, hee hee, aha, look at this. Hello. Sorry, I was looking down. Changing from below and to the left. Several states have passed anti-protest laws in the wake of Black Lives Matter and the NODALPL, with 20 more currently considering similar laws. This backlash proves that people who demand a dignified life threaten the powerful. It has been forgotten that the current GND legislation was only possible because its main advocate, AOC, this was in the past. AOC is no more like this. AOC is a damn fucking centrist who wants to be the next Nancy Pelosi now. Was inspired by the NODAPL uprising. Indigenous people are and have always been at the forefront of the struggle for climate justice. While politicians withdraw from social justice demands of the GDN, Green New Deal, like healthcare, housing, and education, we embrace them. But we know that we must go further. We must throw the full weight of people power behind these demands for dignified life. People power is the organized force of the masses, a movement to reclaim our humanity and rightful relations with our earth. With this, not only will we topple power, but we will build a new world from the ashes of empire, a world where many worlds fit. There can be no rich people without poor people. The rich depend upon the poor, but the poor don't need the rich. Again, the poor don't need the rich. This is our power, people power. Although indigenous people live in a capitalist society, we continue to practice people power. For example, Pueblo communities feed for nearly every ceremonial event. The original purpose of this was to pray surplus from those who held more wealth and to redistribute it amongst those who didn't so that neither a poor class nor a ruling class could form. Everyone's material needs were met. There was no starvation, no houselessness, no alienation. Everyone was a relative, and everyone had relatives. And they're talking about capitalist societies before indigenous societies before capitalism, before colonization. Yeah, send help to Void as anybody can, mutual aid help. Capitalism destroyed this world. We must destroy capitalism to bring it back. People power is the most direct form of democracy. Everyday people decide what's best for themselves, not the elite and powerful. The wealthiest in the world have refused to pay taxes for more than a century. Only indigenous people starve and die of preventable diseases. We believe that carrying on the shoulders of the man who stole our land is the opposite of people power. You can't smudge the murder out of capitalism, nor can you expect the powerful to give up their wealth without the kindness of their heart. So how do we get things to change? Lobby Congress and politicians? No. We reach out directly to our people, hitting the streets and galvanizing the support of community. Once community support is established, politicians will follow. Our leverage is people. Leverage comes from the movement behind you. Only when people move do we build enough power to force concession and eventually win. Number 3, politicians can't do what only the mass movement do. Everyone has heard the term reform. Politicians use it all the time when they're describing their plans for social change. We believe in reform too, but we're proposing a different kind of reform. Reform typically means asking the powerful to implement gradual changes that we hope will eventually improve our lives. This approach attempts to treat the symptoms of crisis rather than the structures of power that creates crisis in the first place. The structure creates power in the first place. For example, March 2016, white police officers Austin Shapley had a mandatory lapel camera on his uniform when he murdered 27-year-old Dene mother Laura Tenzingen in broad daylight in Winslow, Arizona. Lapel cameras are often cited by police reformers as a necessary deterrent to police violence and killing. Yet Shapley murdered Tenzingen with impunity and faced no charges. Cops in Winslow continue to harass and harm our relatives. In the same year that Tenzingen was murdered, police arrest over 800 water protectors and brutalized and traumatized countless others at Standing Rock. At that same year, police unalived Native people at a higher rate than any other group and killed a Native woman at 6 times the rate of white women. Yet when proponents call for murdered and missing indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, reform, the solution is more police to address the killing, raping, imprisonment, and torture of Native women. In 2018 and 2019, we saw an increase in death of indigenous children in migrant detention along the U.S.-Mexico border. We witnessed the shootings of U.S. Border Patrol of Claudia Patrice Patrice Gonzalez, an indigenous woman from Guatemala. And we mourn the death of trans indigenous woman Roxana Hernandez in an ICE detention facility. Immigration reforms have called for Border Patrol to keep families together and have also filed lawsuits to call for the construction of more humane cages for these families and individuals. The questions of these reformers ask is, how can we improve the police with, quote, cultural sensitivity training? Question mark. Which politicians should we lobby? Which politicians should we lobby to make these improvements? Instead, we ask, why are police considered the solution to the crisis of indigenous life? Why do they even need the police? Changla Magra, abolish ICE, and no ban on stolen land are the more mere slogans. That's because people from the South are just coming back. They're indigenous lands. Their demands are for a dignified life. The police, military, and border patrol exist to protect the interest of wealth of the elite. Instead of providing homes, healthcare, and food, all we get is more cops, more soldiers, more walls, more poisoned water, and more cages. The interest of a few always outweighs the needs of the many. This is how power works in a world structured by capitalism. Reformists misunderstand this fundamental truth about capitalist states. States protect capital and the ruling class, not life. This is true for police who protect private property while caging and murdering people. It is true for U.S. military campaigns to protect the interests of multinational corporations by bombing villages, schools, and mosques. Reformists who appeal to the state for change compromise our future. We refuse to compromise. Our philosophy of reform is to reallocate social wealth back to those who actually produced it. Workers, the poor, indigenous peoples, and global South, women, migrants, caretakers of the land, and the land itself. The type of reform we seek includes the complete moratorium of oil, gas, coal extraction, the restoration of indigenous land, water, and air, so a healthy state, and a special protection for workers and the land. These non-reformist reforms are crucial to achieving abolition, decolonization, and liberation. Where will we get the money to fulfill these reforms? We will dispossess the wealth from corporate polluters and settler government and redistribute it to the masses, restoring dignity and creating jobs to caretake and heal the planet and build our collective future. 4. From theory to action. Bosses run the world, from the White House to the highest executives of the multinational corporations that plunder the earth. Yet there is no unified left that poses a real threat to the bosses. We have witnessed massive grassroots rebellions against the fossil fuel industries, police violence, racist immigration policies, and labor exploitation. Yet nothing has coalesced into a unified mass movement. We believe that struggling for these reforms to restore the health of our bodies and the earth will serve as the most powerful vehicle for building a mass movement. We cannot simply be against something. We must be for. Hold on. Oh wait, where did it go? Oh my gosh. I hate when I lose my spot. Oh my gosh, I just lost my spot for the future. I'm going to do this. I'm going to redo this because I lost my spot, everybody. Sorry. 4. Theory to action. Bosses run the world, from White House to the highest executives, for the multinational corporations that plunder the earth. Yet there is no unified left that opposes the real threat to bosses. Hold on a second. Wait, how does Deleuze inform communist psychology? I don't know. I have no idea. Don't know. Sorry. We have witnessed mass grassroots rebellions against the fossil fuel industry, police violence, racist immigration policies, and labor exploitation. Yet nothing has coalesced into a unified mass movement. We believe that struggling for these reforms to restore the health of our bodies and the earth will serve as the most powerful vehicle for building a mass movement. We cannot simply be against something. We must be for something. We will make recommendations that can be used at any level of governance, for the grassroots to the tribal councils, to the city councils. We cannot turn away from the state because the state has its sights set on us at all times. Indigenous people know that every moment of our existence is mediated by the state. It is legal to give birth in our traditional homes without state permits, and we aren't even allowed to visit our sacred sites that lie within federal lands without proof of identity. The state harasses us wherever we go because we are not supposed to exist. We are supposed to be gone, erased off the land. The U.S. so desperately wants to exploit for profit. However, we do not appeal to the state to right these wrongs. Instead, we must organize and agitate wherever the state has set its sights on, amongst urban indigenous youth, women, migrant, black people, LGBTQ, plus our sacred mountains and waters. We cannot simply build isolated utopias while the rest of the world burns, nor can we wait for the slow process of reforms to kick in. We cannot simply heal our individual traumas, nor can we consume better to save the environment. We cannot vote harder and place all our hope in a few individuals in Congress. Climate change will kill us before any of these strategies liberate the planet from capitalism. By fighting for non-reformist reforms in and with the most vulnerable, communities will drain power and resources from state surveillance and harm and reinvestment these resources in the well-being of all. We will regain our collective power. We will be inspired by the visions for the future that will outpace the state at every turn. We will be disciplined and organized to capture the momentum of the next rebellion and catapult it into a full-blown mass movement. We will fight for redistribution of wealth stolen from us, whether it's land, water, air, or labor. We will carry each other's dreams and dignity in our hearts. We will remain steadfast in our commitment to each other. We will seek peace and right relations between all life. We will do this in such a way that adheres to the principles of abolition and anti-capitalism and decolonization. Join us in this struggle. Areas of struggles. In the occupation, divest from the following police and military institutions. Defund police, Lag Magre Child Protective Service, end border town violence, abolish incarceration, prisons, juvenile detention facilities, jails, and border security, end the U.S. military occupation everywhere, abolish imperial borders, heal our bodies, reinvest in following institutions and service, citizenships and equal rights for everyone, free and sustainable housing for everyone, free education for everyone, free healthcare for everyone, free accessible public transportation for everyone, self-unaliving prevention and non-carceral mental health services, healthy, indigenous, and abundant food for everyone, clean water and air, sexual domestic violence services, and reproductive justice, MMIWG2. Healing our planet creates jobs by reinvesting in the following: clean, sustainable energy, traditional and sustainable agriculture, land, water, and air, and animal restoration, above and below ground, protection and restoration of sacred sites, enforcement of treaty rights, and other agreements. Here we go. Executive summary. All right. I don't know what BWO is. This dude, I don't know about this guy. I don't know. Hey, salam alaikum. Executive summary. I think it was here. There is no hope for restoring the planet's fragile and dying ecosystems without indigenous liberation. This isn't an exaggeration. It is simply the truth. Indigenous people understand the choice that confronts us: decolonization or extinction. We have unapologetically renewed our bonds with the earth by implementing our intellectual traditions in our own movements for decolonization. There is no turning back. These bonds are sacred and will never be broken. This is why indigenous water protectors and land defenders throughout the world are criminalized and assassinated on a daily basis. We have chosen life. Therefore, we've been marked for death. Despite this grim reality, indigenous people continue to caretake the land, and even under threat of daily attacks, like mothers, nurses, and educators. Indigenous water protectors and land defenders perform one of the most important types of labor we depend on as a species for social and biological reproduction. Caretaking humanity will not exist without caretakers, but caretaking is labor. It takes work to plant crops. It takes work to hunt. It takes work to raise children. It takes work to clean homes. It takes work to break down a buffalo. It takes work to learn the priorities of medicines. Healing the planet is ultimately about creating infrastructures of caretaking that will replace infrastructures of capitalism. Capitalism is contrary to life. Caretaking promotes life. As we know throughout the Red Deal, caretaking is at the center of contemporary indigenous movements for decolonization and liberation. We therefore look to these movements for guidance on building infrastructures of caretaking that have the potential to produce caretaking economies and create jobs now and in the future. We also look at the infrastructures of caretaking that is currently emerging, where capitalist nations, states have failed to save lives from COVID-19. Under the current system of global capitalism, caretaking is undervalued and often unrecognized as a form of labor. Caretakers like mothers and water protectors make up a huge percentage of workers who produce a social and material means by which we live. Yet they're not paid. In a world shaped by pandemic, caretakers have become the most important sectors of workers, saving people's lives and keeping whole families and communities afloat. Where was I at? There we go. Mutual aid networks, populated by caretakers, are proliferating, providing relief to the most vulnerable and paving the way for robust caretaking economies to potentially replace the crumbling systems of global capitalism. Current mutual aid efforts are neither state-sanctioned nor state-funded. They are entirely people-led and the result of working-class solidarity between nurses, service providers, students, domestic workers, migrant farmers, and families. Mutual aid networks affirmed life by caretaking humanity rather than denying life by abandoning and exploiting humanity. However, the monumental challenge that confronts us is how to turn caretaking labor into life-affirming mass movements that can topple global capitalism once the emergency conditions of the pandemic lift. Only when we are able to mount a real threat to the hegemony of global capitalism through such movements will we be able to heal the planet. Like the development of mass movements, restoring our relationship with the land is not optional. We if we wish to avoid extinction. But this isn't some mystical vision where we go out and hug trees. This is a serious agenda for decolonization that requires comprehensive land return programs and funding of mass indigenous-led land restoration projects. Healthy reciprocity with the environment also depends upon indigenous peoples having unrestricted access to land unencumbered by colonial borders and free of harassment from agents of the state. We understand that the land is our means of production as indigenous people. This is why decolonization, land return are not metaphors. Land is also the means of production for settler economies, which acquire property as a basic building block, often called primitive accumulation by Marxists. So, for the accumulation of capital and power, we cannot successfully wage class war until indigenous land reparations is taken seriously as precursors to seizing the means of production more broadly. The U.S. imperialism, the greatest threat to the future of the planet, will never end if land remains in the hands of first world settler capitalists. The collective future of us all depends upon the ability of indigenous caretakers to work with the land, restore its health, and reestablish balance with our relations. With threats like radioactive contamination, wildfires, chemical pollutions, and biodiversity loss, we will also need to seek new and alternative technologies, something Native people embrace because we have always, we have always been technological innovators, scientists, and engineers. They proved that before colonization. But as we know, capitalists have a monopoly on technology, with the majority of the most advanced technology being used for war efforts. Scientists are denied funding for projects that are not considered profitable or that directly disrupt the flow of capital to the already wealthy. What if technology was created for the benefit of all life on Earth? In order to answer this question, we must turn to indigenous knowledge. The following pages prove that our traditions of science, technology, and diplomacy are key to ensuring a future for all living beings on this planet. What does it mean to take up healing? As a revolutionary concept, one that transcends the neoliberal realm of individual trauma and allow us to imagine a world that prioritize collective well-beings and healthy relationships. Many of us in the United States, especially indigenous country, have spent the better part of 40 years accepting our status as injured subjects, stuck in endless cycles of trauma that make it seemingly impossible to transform our DNA, let alone our social conditions. Trauma-informed thinking has taken over indigenous governments, institutions, nonprofit revenue streams, and even movements. Like electoral politics, trauma-based healing sucks all the political and emotional energy out of the room, leaving little space for others and other possibilities and visions to change. The narrowing of our collective energies into trauma has come to the expense of building vibrant and militant struggles for liberation with other colonized and oppressed peoples of the world. Rather than allying with revolutionary movements in the global south to overturn U.S. imperialism once and for all, we argue on the social media and academic panels about injury. Who is more injured and who injures more? Who injures more? This is entirely a first world discourse. Movements outside of the United States rarely trafficked in the language of trauma and injury to develop political positions or tactics of organizing. In this time of global pandemic, we must reclaim healing from the first world neoliberal jargon and trauma and injury, and instead globalize our efforts. Healing is real and possible and necessary. The Red Deal advocates for healing our bodies and the planet, but not from trauma. We must heal from colonialism and capitalism together. COVID-19 is a harsh but crucial lesson about the need for collective healing, which will require militant movements to liberate the planet from systems and structures that target whole nations and species. Although there are many points of entry into this global struggle, there can be no doubt that indigenous movements for decolonization and liberation must be at the center of our collective efforts. Let me read that again. Although there are many points of entry into this global struggle, there are no doubt that indigenous movements for decolonization and liberation must be at the center of our collective efforts. Here we go. I think we're starting at Area 1. Here we go, Area 1. Area 1, clean, sustainable energy. Why is this important? The world is transitioning from fossil fuels to clean and renewable energies, but not fast enough. Resource extraction is still ravaging indigenous, black, and migrant and other than human communities. The Amazon forest fires of 2019 resulted in the burning of over 2 million acres of the assassination of Guararira indigenous leader and land defender Pablo Paulino, all in the name of mining and logging. In early 2020, Canada invaded sovereign Wet'suwet'en territory to remove Onset-Outen land defenders who had successfully stopped construction of the Coastal GasLink pipe for close to a decade. And the Nene Nation is still one of the largest resource colonies in the United States, supplying energy through coal and natural gas conversion to some of the largest cities in the American West, while many of its own citizens live without basic infrastructures like clean water and electricity. For indigenous and poor communities throughout Turtle Island, the fracking revolution of the past decade has been particularly violent. Fracking is a type of drill that injects chemicals and water into the ground to break up underlying shell rock, releasing the oil and natural gas contained within it. Fracking produces more natural gas and crude oil for the U.S. economy. 2/3 of natural gas in the United States comes from fracking, while approximately 50% of the nation's crude oil is procured through the same method. Corporations like TC Energy, formerly TransCanadian, the corporation that built the Dakota Access Pipeline, claim that natural gas is one of the world's cleanest and safest energy resources. Natural gas is often called clean because it emits 50% less carbon than coal when you burn it. Governments like the state of New Mexico have partnered with fracking corporations to create shiny PR campaigns about the benefits of natural gas as a bridge fuel that will help the planet transition from dirty fuel resources like coal into net zero carbon renewables like solar. Native people know the truth about this so-called clean energy source. While the natural gas boom has created billions in profit for extractive corporations, government and investors, the fracking required to extract natural gas from below the Earth's surface has devastated indigenous communities in eastern Dene. infrastructure like the Coastal GasLink pipelines that carries natural gas from fracking fields to ports for sale violate Wet'suwet'en sovereignty, and the explosion of temporary fracking labor in the Balkan oil shale region has increased grape and human trafficking by oil workers of indigenous women and girls from nations like the Manden, Hidatsa, and oh my gosh, Arikara, ARA. Sorry, everybody. Meanwhile, I'm gonna stop right there. Oh my gosh, almost did that. That goes up there. Just looking back a little bit. Okay. Meanwhile, extractive corporations are investing billions in renewable energy technologies to ensure they have a new source of profit once dirty energy is phased out, if in favor of clean resources. Renewable energy corporations and startup proliferate, creating a new class of millionaires and billionaires will invest in green technology to make a buck and proclaim they are saving the planet. United States backs right-wing coups in indigenous nations like Bolivia to access green energy sources like lithium. Rather extractive capitalism or green capitalism, profit is all the ruling class cares about, not the future of humanity, not indigenous sovereignty, not the health of the earth. It is thus crucial that we imagine and organize for new sustainable energy alternatives led by indigenous people. Indigenous people have lived sustainably since time immemorial and can continue to live in reciprocity with all those we share the earth with. But sustainable does not mean primitive. We must reclaim indigenous intellectual traditions of the Western Hemisphere, which have some of the most advanced technology in human history. We have millennia old mathematical and scientific theories that allows us to track the movement of the solar system, map out stars and galaxies, and create functional plumbing and adequate systems. We had these technologies long before Europeans discovered such things. Science and technology have never been at odds with indigenous lifeways. It is only because of capitalism, monopoly, and technology that science is used to destroy the planet. Today, the most advanced technology in the world is used to create military weapons that kill millions rather than harness to save life. Because of their total control by private corporation, the health science are incapable of saving human lives during the COVID-19 pandemic. Imagine if technology was developed by the humble people of the earth for the humble people of the earth. Capitalism can never be compatible with clean, sustainable energy. Capitalism kills the earth. For the earth to live, capitalism must die. What needs our urgent attention? Green energy jobs are often touted as a rational for promoting renewable energy projects. However, if we look at renewable energy projects like Kayenta Solar Project, Moapa Southern Paiute Solar Projects, and the Siliquat in Solar Farm, the majority of employment for tribal members is temporary and only comes from construction and planning. The maintenance is done by outside contractors from vision to completion. Solar jobs are not a sustainable source of jobs for local communities unless maintenance, monitoring, and remediations remediation are taken into account. Saying that renewable energy will create more jobs simply isn't enough. We must have a clear understanding of the spectrum of labor that goes into green energy and demand that local communities, not private contractors, work these jobs. Next point, the materials that are used in solar panel systems are extremely important to consider. Lithium-ion batteries, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, are and will be the main storage of renewable energies. Lithium-ion batteries are made from two main minerals, cobalt and lithium. The Democratic Republic of Congo holds 60% of the world's cobalt, while Bolivia holds 70% of the world's lithium. Both countries face heavy exploitation from the world's economic powers, like the US, China, Canada, France, and India. While these countries are supplying the global north with green energy for the future, there remain some of the poorest nations in the world. We must not replicate the injustice and inequalities between the global north and the global south that exists under our current structures of global capitalism by simply replacing fossil fuels extractions with renewable energy extractions. Even at the transition to green energy, the capitalist and colonial relations remain intact. This is called imperialism, whereby the wealth and power of the global north nations depend entirely upon the poverty and exploitation of the global south nations. We must fight against a system that deems the world's poorest indigenous expendables for the sake of progress and profit. What can we do about it? We demand that all corporate polluters be held accountable and pay for full, I gotta look up this word, I can't say it. Hold on, everybody. Remediation, my bad, everybody. Full remediation of the land and reparations to the people who have felt the impacts of extraction for generations. This can look like boycotts and divestment campaigns, or urging tribal leaders to break contracts with corporate polluters. Educate tribal communities on the histories of resource extraction. Regardless of how clean and green technology is, the process by which corporations extract value from indigenous life for the benefit of settler colonialism remains the same. Organized to stop all forms of energy extractions for native communities and lands. Whether it is coal mining, fracking, or solar farming. No more than ever, we need people to understand that we have to actively create the world we want to live in. Man-made disasters like climate change and the unnecessary spread of COVID-19 are not manifestations of, quote, the earth healing itself, end quote. Such deadly events are a direct result of the actions of those who pillage the earth, the ruling class. These capitalists view the earth as a resource to be exploited instead of a relative to be protected. Wherever you are, create campaigns that pinpoint the central roles of capitalism in creating this suffering and the need to dismantle capitalism for the sake of our common future. Area 2, traditional and sustainable agriculture. Why is it important? What time is it? Doing good on time. All right. Indigenous people have always adjusted our life ways to maintain sustainability. For example, when the Pueblo people left Chaco Canyon, it was realized that irrigation farming alone was unsustainable in times of severe drought. The dry farming methods were developed. Simultaneously, areas were nurtured where natural food systems already exist. In addition to continuing the use of ditch systems, forest management was crucial in maintaining healthy watersheds, minimizing fire damage, and promoting healthy game and grasslands. Scientific racism works to invalidate and exclude land-based knowledge and wisdom. Modern science is only now recognizing the benefits of indigenous knowledge that has been known for centuries, while refusing to restore lands to these same indigenous experts. Extractive and militarization on native land disrupts our land-based economies, which have always allowed for sustainable food production. One of the first weapons of colonial violence was to destroy crops and food systems, to weaken people, often coinciding with the forced adoption of non-native diets and the outlawing of growing traditional foods. An example of this is how the Spanish outlawed the Mayan and Aztec people from growing amaranthine, amaranth, even going as far as to cut off the hands of anyone caught growing it later in Pueblo communities, and tithe of the best of a family's crops needed to be turned over to the Spanish missionaries at the end of each season, or face harsh punishment. They were required to fill up the length of the manta dress with food that was then seized. Imperial borders are also sites of militarization that have inhibited the flow of the seed trade and knowledge sharing amongst native people throughout Turtle Island. Historically, native communities have preserved seeds by sharing them with other communities so that they wouldn't go extinct, and even actively work to strengthen crop diversity. The forced relocation, the displacement of First Nations' desperate use from our land, medicines, spiritual sites, and food resources, Native people experience the highest rate of food insecurity, despite the fact that so much native land has been stolen by big agricultural companies for mass food production. Native people continue to live in food deserts. In these food deserts, up to 85% of the food is processed, and fresh fruits and vegetables are rarely available. On average, Native people live on reservations, pay $7 more per basket of food, and travel 3 times further than the average person to access groceries. This can be especially difficult for elders who often do not have access to reliable transportation. 1 in 4 Native homes does not have enough food regardless of whether they live on or off the reservation. It is unrealistic to expect the most marginalized to make a full return to land-based agriculture as a primary means of subsistence. We know the crushing weight of capitalism and land left has forced us into the wage economy. Oftentimes the job available force a separation of people from their land. We know that we cannot heal the land and the substance they provide until capitalism and colonialism no longer exists. The blatant theft of native land for resource extraction, settlement, big agriculture, military projects, etc., is directly to blame for this epidemic of food scarcity. Projects of extraction and militarization prevent people from living off the land, and long after they're gone, they leave the land poisoned. Radioactive contamination of our land leaves them unusable for centuries. Seed sovereignty is constantly threatened by commodity culture through big agriculture seed patents, cross-pollination with genetically engineered contaminants, and laws catering to agriculture companies that make traditional seeds illegal to grow and possess. Seeds also have very specific ties to the birthwork movement. The experiences and environmental exposures impact 3 generations in 1 pregnancy. Seeds have cultural connotations related to birth, belonging to the place, and ceremonies around how we claim our kin. Food is quite literally medicine and culture foundations for the community to thrive. What is our urgent attention? Seed sovereignty. Traditional seed sovereignty has a direct tie to reproductive health and body sovereignty. Promoting reproductive justice promotes seed sovereignty. Imperial borders directly affect our trade and seed sharing that relatives internationally that we traditionally trade within the past. Big agriculture actively suppresses the kills and varieties of sacred foods and plants in favor of mass-produced GMOs. Monsanto, a food monopoly tycoon, is trying to patent indigenous seeds that we have grown since time immemorial, therefore stealing and monopolizing sacred and life-sustaining plants. Mainly genetically engineered crops, such as corn and wheat, cannot be grown without the use of the cancer-caused herbicide Roundup, a byproduct of Agent Orange. Roundup creates widespread environmental and waterway degradation and is being used in combination with toxic pesticides that are also just as harmful to life and the environment. The introduction of big agriculture crops into small indigenous economy across Turtle Island is systematically destroying local economies as they cannot compete with price differentials. In Mexico, the birthplace of corn, GMO seed companies drastically reduce the price of corn, so much that local markets crushed, causing an uprising to ban GMO seeds across the region. Food deserts. Indigenous people on and off the reservation need foods that are whole, healthy, and indigenous to their diet. Children, elders, and birth givers are the most marginalized groups of food security. Accessibility. Capitalism is why only the cheapest food and not a variety of healthy food are available to make it to the most rural areas. It is also the reason why healthy foods are inaccessible for low-income families in rural and urban communities. This translates into having to travel great distances and therefore spend more income to get to the grocery store that sells healthy food and affordable prices. Resource extraction depletes and pollutes soil, making the land unusable for generations and minimizing available land for growing food. This creates the need for expensive, long-term environmental restorations, usually siloed into Western European. That's all it says. All right. Worldviews and practices such as cap and cover, excessive soil removal. I got to do a freaking thing now. Yay, I did it the first time. Worldwide practices such as cap and cover, excessive soil removal, less protective standards of cleanup, and the production of waste dumps adjacent to poor communities. Federal food programs such as commodity distribution programs try to compensate for the destruction capitalism and colonialism have caused to native food systems. However, distributing food that are not indigenous has a negative impact on health and wellness in the long term, creating issues like unhealthy bodies, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and other health impacts. Land return. Our land, air, and waterways are polluted from capitalist endeavors, government mismanagement, and militarization. Traditional caregiving and sustainability does not disrespect or cut kinship with our land, air, water, and other than human relatives. Our mountain relatives are under military control and have been contaminated with nuclear waste and radiation. This has affected every corner of life and our ability to sustain our relatives, from contaminated water to contaminated animals and plants. and even the clay we use. This is a catastrophic offense and will take years beyond our generation's lifetimes to clean and restore. Having control over our ancestral territories is vital to our ability to care for them and is a generations long pathway to true sustainability. Only when land is restored and returned can we begin to rebuild our economies and our nations with true sovereignty. What can we do about it? Drink of water. We can incorporate hydroponics and aquaponic food systems into our life ways while the land is in remediation from extractive and military projects that have caused immense devastation. For indigenous people, we can decolonize and restore balance and harmony to our food security and sovereignty through planting community gardens using our planting, harvesting, and ditch work songs. We can use our knowledge of waterways, seed storage, seed exchange, dry farming, and waffle gardens to receive our gardening traditions. We can do this in a way that is culturally and spiritually grounded, so our prayers support the healthy and well-being of our communities. Everyone can help to restore indigenous seed economies by trading with indigenous folks around the world. We can disregard imperial borders imposed upon us by reinvigorating new non-capitalist ancestral tradition networks. We can revive and reintegrate traditional ways of harvest management through cooperating and exchanging with others, thereby strengthening traditional and sustainable economies. In order to survive current challenges and any future challenges to our food resources, we suggest remaining flexible, open, and willing to learn new ways to be healthy. These ways include how food is prepared and handled, having direct contact from seed planting to harvest honors traditional food sovereignty. We suggest reviving old recipes and creating new recipes in which nutrient-rich foods are centered. Their fruits and vegetables are our main source of vitamins. The widespread labeling of foods containing genetically engineered and transgenic genetic ingredients must be mandated for food justice, allowing people the option of informed consent for what they are consuming. We must be in solidarity with indigenous communities globally in shared resistance to ban GMO and genetic seeds and work towards creating genetically engineered free zone across nations. We look to the work that has already been done to preserve traditional and sustainable agriculture by the New Mexico Food and Seed Sovereignty Alliance, which creates a declaration of seed sovereignty and living document for the New Mexico on March 11, 2006. The document offers 30-point highlighting the devastations of land and agriculture and lays out a framework of restoration, and a link to declarations of seed sovereignty can be found here. We can pressure our tribal governments to cut ties with corporate polluters who aid the devastation of land in the name of economic development. We can divest from big banks that fund extractive projects, both as individuals and native nations. We can stand against continued land devastation by organizing and participating in protests, blockades, and encampments. We can urge our tribal governments to assert their sovereignty and rebuild our relationships with native peoples beyond U.S. borders to restore knowledge and trade that can allow us to heal land and rebuild our own economic frameworks to end independence of settler states. Area 3. Doing good. All right. Land, water, air, and animal restoration. Why is it important? Recent studies show that although the world's the world's 370 million indigenous peoples make up less than 5% of the total human population. Traditional indigenous territories encompass between 20 to 25% of the world's land surface, and they coincide with areas that hold 80 to 90% of the planet's biodiversity. Also, the greatest diversity of indigenous groups coincide with the world's largest tropical forest wilderness areas in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And 11% of the world's forest land are legally owned by indigenous peoples and communities. These forests, like the Amazon, are the world's lungs. Climate research shows that the most serious aspect of our current environmental crisis is the loss of biodiversity, which affects human survival by inferring the crucial ecosystem services such as crop pollination and water purification, while also threatening the land, air, and water relatives with whom we share this world. Of the 4 billion or so species that have evolved over the last 3.5 billion years, some 99% have gone extinct. Over time, the rate of extinction has been balanced by the evolution of new species, but there have been 5 exceptions to this pattern: periods of mass extinctions when the rate of species lost was so great that the biodiversity of the earth was substantially reduced. The number of species on the earth at this point in time is estimated to be 8.7 million, with perhaps another million or so yet to be identified. Knowing how many species there are on the planet means we also know how fast they are going extinct. A 2015 study in Science Advances shows that there has been an exceptional rapid rate of species loss over the last few centuries when compared to normal background rates of species extinctions. Findings show that species are going extinct at a rate up to 100 times the background rate. Or, to put it bluntly, extinction rates have reached levels unparalleled since dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago. There is no longer any doubt we have entered a 6th mass extinction in Earth's history. The last mass extinction event occurred 65 million years ago, and it took hundreds of thousands of years for species diversity to recover. A key difference between this extinction event and previous events is that all of the past mass extinctions have been caused by sudden cataclysmic events, such as a series of mass volcanic outbursts, major asteroid impacts, or dramatic sea level change. Today, mass extinctions are being driven by the effects of just one single species, human beings. Certainly, not all human beings are responsible for mass extinction, but rather those who uphold the institutions that destroy the earth: capitalism, settler colonialism, and imperialism. A small minority of rich human benefits from the constant pillaging of the earth for profit, while the majority of the world's species struggle to survive or simply die because of these human-created systems of greed and exploitation. There is a reason why mass reduction of biodiversity via multi-species extinctions is related to land restoration. In places where the health of the land has been destroyed through pollution and hyper-exploitation, biodiversity disappears. Yet, where indigenous people have freedom to caretake, the land biodiversity flourishes. This is because, as opposed to capitalism, indigenous people around the world do not see ourselves as separate from the land. For us, land, plants, animals, and water are our relatives. The soil is alive and interacting with the air, waterways, and all other than human creatures. The indigenous perspective looks forward to the future of our children, our children's children, and to the well-being of all living things. It is also it also looks back to the wisdom of our ancestors. This intimate relationship between past, present, and future allows for close observation of the interactions and interdependencies between species across time and space. It allows for reverence of the land, in which human lives in balance with all other beings. Air, water, animal, and human restoration depends upon the health of the land. Restoring the land and our commitment to living in balance with our relatives is thus key to securing a future for all. Current statistics about mass extinctions, biodiversity, and air quality shows irrefutably that land cannot simply be, quote, restored through technological fixes or environmental protection. Adjudicated in settler institutions, land restoration must center indigenous land stewardship and multiple species caretaking, and thus the mass return of land to indigenous nations and the implementation of true indigenous self-determination if we are to have any hope of a future on this planet. What is our urgent attention? Soil degradation has global ramification on resources, sustainability. Capitalism, in its unrelenting demand for profit, uses and destroys the land with no consideration for those ramifications through its myopic lens. Capitalism has no regard for future generations. It does not see the land as a living thing to be cared for and respected. For capitalism, the land is simply another tool with which to satisfy greed and gratification. We must understand that capitalism is the enemy of the future. Extractive industries, logging, encroaching infrastructures, deforestation, improper agricultural practices such as monocropping and overgrazing all contribute to the decline in the soil structure. Soil degradation in the form of salt and water imbalance is often caused by waste disposal, chemical pollutants, and leaky pipes. The compression of soil, which decreases air and water retention, is the result of compaction brought on by heavy equipment, foods, and building structures. Excessive irrigation and fertilizers induce soil fertility depletion, while logging and deforestation lead to accelerated erosion. Healthy soil is essential for the production of vegetables and diversity of vegetation. And diversity of vegetation attracts insects, birds, and other animals that serve important functions in maintenance of ecosystems. Land restoration is imperative to restoring biodiversity. Biodiversity is the key to vibrant and thriving planet. What can we do about it? Design ecological restoration projects in your area. Traditional practices for ecological restoration includes revegetation by combining native, domestic, and wild plant species, crop rotations, agroforestry, burning practices, and utilized by the Aboriginal people of Australia, intercropping, and water harvesting. These practices are designed to increase the health of the soil, protect the crops, and create biodiversity, promote food sovereignty in our local context by gardening on a smaller or large scale. Stewardship of the land ensures food security, which is increasingly important in these times of global pandemic. Find, join, and help a local organization that is pushing back against pollution and contamination caused by industries and resource extraction. End all forms of toxic capitalism will take us a long way in restoring the land to health. Indigenous people have played a key role in climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. The territories of indigenous groups in Brazil, Colombia, Nicaragua, and elsewhere who have been given the rights to their lands have been better conserved than adjacent lands. Promote promote the return of land to indigenous people wherever you are. Popular tactics for indigenous land return includes land trust campaigns and honor taxes. It is easy to see that indigenous people are the most suitable and knowledgeable caretakers of the land. Giving land back to indigenous people is the first step in land restoration. I agree 100%. The two greatest threats faced by indigenous people are the loss of land and the loss of ancestral knowledge. This is a serious and a threat of the masses, extinction of species on Earth, ancestral wisdom, and traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, must be preserved and protected. Gathering of elders where they share their knowledge with tribal members and other indigenous groups can be effective mechanism for ensuring that knowledge is not lost, especially if indigenous youth are active participants. Support for indigenous women networks is also needed, as there are the carriers of ancestral knowledge. They give us plans of action of what we should do, what we should fortify, what we should, create, what kind of things can we create as we do the revolution. So this is another plan of action. This almost makes me feel, in my personal opinion, that the first book I read should be the last one, and these two books that I just reading should be the first two. But, it is what it is, All right. But like, these are just like this is what it's doing. This, and I forgot the next part. And then the next part is like, this is what you can do. So it's great. Just like the last one. Very good. Area 4, protection and restoration of sacred sites. This might be the last one. The United States, and this is 38. The United States is an empire, bringing death and destruction to those within its grasp. According to empirical logic, the land is a source of profit to be consumed. Those who try to protect the land from imperial violence are cast as obstacles and deemed expendable and criminal. In 2016, we saw the brutalization of water protectors at Standing Rock by militarized police. Oil and gas industries continually target Chaco Canyon and mark the surrounding communities as sacrifice zones. In 2019, 38 elders were arrested for blocking access to the 30-meter telescope atop of Mauna Kea and Tohono O'odham. Relatives face daily harassment and restrictions of movement in their own homelands by the U.S. Border Patrol. Police demand consent. How can we demand consent at gunpoint, yet it is the Wet'suwet'en who are criminalized for protecting their territory? Indigenous land defenders of the Amazon are murdered for protecting forests that sustain life for the entire planet. Criminalization of land defenders and water protectors is a tactic to eliminate the grassroots indigenous peoples and other than human relatives. Indigenous people will always resist imperialism and capitalist development because we recognize the United States as an invader. We understand that protecting our relative land, water, air ancestors, women, two-spirit, animals, medicines, children, and others is at the heart of our customary form of governance. If it is what makes us who we are, while phrases that emphasize the sacred, but by emphasizing the sacred, including sacred sites, women are sacred and we are sacred, are now common for describing why we should practice the art of protection. Protecting is at its base simply about being a good relative, giving the violence and destruction that U.S. imperialism forces upon us. Protecting our relatives is a direct rejection of capitalism and empire. We demand the liberation for all our relatives. We demand the future. The Red Deal extends solidarity to indigenous people across the world who are fighting to protect our relatives for the ongoing ravages of imperialism. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples explicitly state in Article 25 that Quote, indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters and coastal seas, and other resources, and to uphold their responsibility to future generations in this regard, end quote. We recognize the need for international leaders who hold imperial nations accountable for their attacks on indigenous lands and bodies. Locally, the continued violations of our relatives stems directly from colonial land loss policies and genocidal attacks by the U.S. government. For as long as settler occupation of our land exists, our relatives will continue to bear the brunt of capitalism. Therefore, capitalism and imperialism must die to protect the sacred. What needs our urgent attention? So that's the next thing. What like they want to draw, what attention should we draw to? Criminalization and brutalization of water protectors and land defenders. We must understand that what happens to the land happens to the people, and vice versa. The protection of relatives must include all relatives. No one is free unless we are all free. Public land is stolen land. Outdoor recreation is often on land that has been stolen and converted into public land. Conservationists and nature lovers who participate in progressive causes must respect the sacred, even if this means they can no longer use the land for recreational activities. Mass movements must be willing to educate about what is sacred and why it is important to return. Here we go, everybody. BAWHYEA, or Blue Lake, is an area which is sacred and only used by indigenous people. The Taos Pueblo Blue Lake was returned to Taos Pueblo in 1970, ending the termination area, which devastated indigenous nations and caused the loss of a future 1.4 million acres of tribal land. The Blue Lake example shows how the protection of sacred sites is key to the retention, return, and restoration of stolen land. Love this. What can we do about it? There's your action. Great Chaco Canyon support people in the communities directly dealing with oil and gas infrastructures. Stop government initiated lease sales or fracking operation. Protests at Bureau of Land Management offices raise concerns about MMIWG2 and, quote, man camps. Go to local organizing events and meetings to end fracking in your area. Manua Key protests to stop the construction of the 30-meter telescope. Offer solidarity. Support the struggles through writing. Support international movements and grassroots organizing through education, solidarity events, film screenings, teach-ins, protests, and rallies. Provide free legal work and services for water protectors and land defenders. Donate to legal funds like, oh my gosh, here we go, UNIST OTEN camps. So it's UNIST, the T has an apostrophe. OT, I think it's an accent, but it looks like, but I'm gonna say apostrophe EN. Camps here, and the Water Protector Legal Collective here. What time is it? Area 5. We'll do Area 5. Reinforcement of the treaty rights and other agreements. Why is this important? Colonial presidents, Congress, and courts see treaties as business transactions to open up indigenous territories. Our expansion and plantation slavery, agriculture, commerce, trade, and resource extraction is as common for politicians to pledge to, quote, honor the treaties as it is for them to break or ignore treaties. To do otherwise would be contrary to the intentions of invaders, which is to secure permanent white settlement by eliminating indigenous nationhood. The colonial approach to treaties has resulted in nothing less than theft and genocide for indigenous peoples, but it is arrogant for invaders to think their system of diplomacy and trade are the only traditions that matter. Indigenous diplomacy proliferates before European invasion and continues to this day. For example, the Anishinaabe intellectual Liana, here we go, Beta Samosika Simpson considered the, here we go, I'm gonna do it again, the Gandu Nangana, it's Naaganinaaa. Sorry, everybody. A pre-colonial treaty for sharing territories between the Anishinaabe Nation and the Haudenosaunee. I know that one. Confederacy in what is today Southern Ontario. Lakota historian Nick Estes notes the, oh, here we go, Wolakota, meaning peace or treaty, originated from the Petassawin, Ptesawin, the white buffalo woman who brought the Lakota Nation into the correct relations with the animal and plant nation. Both of these examples show that discourse is resolved through creating permanent political relations between parties, including other than human nations, based on moral responsibilities and good faith pledges. The consequences for violating these indigenous covenants extends far beyond the human world. Global warming and the sixth mass extinction event are the apocalyptic results of these cascading imbalances. While most of the responsibilities for climate change, imperial nations have imposed remedies through capitalist markets and techno fixes. None so far have sought to rectify their own responsibility. Their failures to act holds the entire future hostage. Original instructions which emphasize peaceful and mutual relations between humans and between humans and the other humans inform the way indigenous people have historically entered into relations with European nations. Even if original instructions are not reciprocated, each party to a treaty has equal power to interpret the meaning of the agreement. While colonizers have chosen to interpret treaties to advance their own genocidal interests, indigenous people have never surrendered the moral authority, responsibility, or sense of justice that original instructions mandate. One of the most important expressions of this commitment is the People's Accords, which were ratified in 2010 in, here we go, Cochabamba, Bolivia. The accords proposed not only just relations with the other than human world, but also impeding the cause of unequal relations between entire nations and human themselves. Imperialism and capitalism under the indigenous leadership of the movement towards socialism. The People's Accord infused traditional ecological knowledge with ecofeminism, eco-socialism, and anti-imperialism. The indigenous Andi Cosmovision of Varvir Ben, or living well, and, oh my gosh, here we go, Pachamama, or Mother Earth, are central to understanding the People's Accords. Living well is not anthrocentric, or, oh, what does that mean? I'm going to find out what that word means. Hold on a second. A second. Regarding humankind as the central and most important element. Okay, cool. Where did that word go? Where did I find the word? There it is. Afrocentric, or focused solely on human relations. It is earth-centric, focused on the whole. It understands that capitalist domination over nature is patriarchal, and that overconsumption. The reason why it's patriarchal, because a lot of Christians see themselves above nature instead of with nature. So it's patriarchal, meaning that we have dominion over consumption, which is driven by the first world, is not the solution, but the problem. If all the humanity consumed as much as the average US citizen, we would need 4 Earths to sustain it. We only have one planet to share, and just relations with the natural world are impossible without just equitable relations among humanity first. Like the Red Deal, the People Accords are a indigenous treaty, a covenant with the earth and its people. The US-backed right-wing military coup that dispossessed MAS leader in Bolivia and Bolivia President Evo Morales in 2019 was also a coup against this environmental covenant and indigenous socialism. It is necessary now more than ever to reestablish correct relations by enforcing the original covenant and living documents or treaties with the earth. This begins by upholding the indigenous interpretations and authority over all treaties and agreements made with colonial powers. Whether these agreements were struck 300 years ago or yesterday, there are also hundreds of multilateral agreements and treaties with social movements and the humble people of the earth that requires enforcement. We cannot and won't wait for colonizers. The power is in our hand to enact natural law and restore balance in accordance with indigenous principles. Hold on a second, let me look. Might go a little over. Oh no, I'm going to read the rest. And then we'll be done. What needs our urgent attention? Decolonizing the atmosphere, restore to oppressed nations and the developing countries the atmospheric space that is occupied by first world greenhouse gas emissions. This means the decolonization of the atmosphere through the reduction and absorption of their emissions. Transfer technology. First world countries must assume all the costs and technological transfers need of oppressed nations who have lost development opportunities due to living under the boot of the US imperialism or in the restricted atmospheric space. Open the borders. First world countries must assume all responsibilities for the hundreds of millions of people that will be forced to migrate due to capitalist-driven climate change. They must eliminate their restrictive immigration policies and instead offer migrants to decent life with full human rights guaranteed to in their countries. Pay climate debts. First world countries must assume all adaptation debt related to the impacts of climate change on the developing countries by providing the means to prevent, minimize, and deal with damages arise from their excessive emissions. That's why I'm saying, because of this, that's why I'm saying that like the developing worlds like the United States owes reparation domestically, but also owes reparation worldwide and globally. Mass land return the land to its original caretakers. Indigenous nations, billions of acres and territories have been taken out of indigenous ecological stewardship, resulting in mass extinctions. Resorting land to indigenous caretakers is a necessary step ensuring any kind of future of this planet. What can we do about it? Restore treaty making. with indigenous nations, respect and uphold indigenous treaties as international agreements and the supreme law of the land, adopt and implement the 2007 United Nations Declarations on Indigenous Rights, which they have a link there. So if you read this book, they have links. Adopt and implement the 2010 People's Accord. Adopt and implement a plural national governance structure or constitution that recognizes, upholds, and defends indigenous sovereignty and nationhood. Adopt and implement the 2011 Mother Earth Accords. Adopt and implement the indigenous principles of just transition. Adopt and implement the 2013 Treaty to protect the sacred from tar sands project. Adopt and implement the United Nations Universal Rights of Mother Earth. And on each of these, it looks like you're able to read what it says. So like if you click there. All right. And I think we're done. Yeah, we're done. Again, go to that website. Go to where was it at? therednation.org. Check out how you can help out. I'm going to do the same thing. I will do the same thing myself. I'm going to go check it out and see how I can help out and what they need from me, if they even need me. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think we should all investigate in this. Thank you, Red Nation, for giving out these books and the plans of action and everything. I appreciate this so much. Tomorrow we'll start a new book. We'll start on the communist necessity, get back in a little bit of a Maoism and stuff, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I like the Red Nation. I think they're a center point of how we can decolonize, especially here on Turtle Island, and what it might look like, and what are the tasks and strategies and tactics in order to gain that thing, and what is me as a non-indigenous person, because they include us. They want us to be included in this, you know what I mean? But they still want it in the hands of the indigenous people, and for us to learn and rectify the damages of capitalism and imperialism and colonialism. So like it looks like they want us to be a part of the restoration, but they want us to be led by them and be taught by indigenous people.